All right. I'm so excited to invite back onto the show Dr. Tamsin Astor. Tamsin is a chief habit scientist, and I love this, and we'll go into this, helping busy people organize themselves so they have time for what they want, what they need, and for fun. Oh my goodness. That all should just come a little more naturally, and I don't think that we have that figured out. Welcome, Tamsin.
Thank you. So much fun to be back here again.
Oh, I was looking at, I think this is what I have loved about you all these years. First of all, I came across your book in Barnes and Noble forever ago, and this is how we ended up meeting and have been podcasting together for years and years. But I think what's really unique about you is that you have combined and blended a bunch of these trainings from psychology, neuroscience, yoga, meditation, Ayurveda, health coaching, executive coaching. You have such a skill set, such a unique offering to your community, to your clients. And I just want to dive in here for a minute because my understanding is that like we do, we grow, and not only as a person, but in our business because we've grown as a person. Can you take us, just rewind a little bit back through your current journey and where that's landing you right now?
Sure. And I'm also excited to share as I've been doing that, what I've realized I need more of, and the couple of trainings that I'm embarking on next year that I'm so excited about. So first, I think what might be as a sort of interesting overview is that I was diagnosed with ADHD in February, and I'm a woman in perimenopause. And what both of those things have done for me is created a space for me to really slow down and observe how my brain works, how I show up, what structures are important to me, how do I need to be taking care of myself so that I can serve the people that are really important to me, my children, my family, my friends, and my clients and community as a sort of as a whole, because I'm also quite an activist in energy. Maybe my glasses give some of that away. So that realization led me to the understanding why I do so many certifications. So I don't do certifications because I want the letters after my name. I do them because of the way my brain learns and the way that I cultivate tools and skills that I can use for myself and for others. Because for me, I need to be in a space where I can read, I can listen, I can write, I can talk, and I can have conversations about the learning. And if I just do one of those and I don't weave those together in a kind of iterative, circular, sort of spirally way,
Yeah.
I forget it all and I don't know how to use it and I don't implement it. So what I've realized with the self-study in the last year or so is that I do these trainings so that I can implement the learning in my life and the lives of others, rather than this desire to be accredited or whatever it is that I'm doing. So that was a huge kind of there's something about a lot of people, and I definitely went through that, had some sadness and small t trauma around oh, what would my life have looked like if I'd had these diagnoses, these awarenesses earlier. That quickly pivoted into, oh my God, there's so much data out there. There's so many people talking and thinking about these things. How can I use this to really understand who I am and how I show up and create the structures and support? So a few of the things that I've sort of dove into in the last few years, one is somatic work. And I've been working for a year and a half with an embodiment coach. I've worked with her privately and I've worked with her in a group setting. And one of the things that's been so fascinating about that work is the realization that I am incredibly heady. Like my first response is to go into the thoughts, the words, the thinking, right? The logic, the intellect. And that when I am experiencing traumatic things, and I've had a certain amount of trauma in my life, big and small t, my first step is to dissociate and I leave my body and I stop paying attention to my body. And, when you look back at the way we raise our children, sit in rows, wait to pee until it's the lunch break, whatever, we train people not to listen to their bodies from such a young age. And I was actually having this conversation with my coach yesterday. I was like, how is it? I'm 40 years old. I've been working with you for a year and a half. How is it that I have to do these sessions with you to understand what I'm thinking and feeling about something? Right?
Right.
What? This is crazy. Sometimes we need to be witnessed, which was a really lovely perspective, and so turning it away from me not working hard enough at doing the work and all of that, right? Yeah, so that's been one really huge area of learning, is what wisdom can my body tell me about this decision I'm making, this experience I've had, this thing I'm pondering doing, what happened here and how am I making sense of it? So that's been one of the huge new areas that I've really dug into.
Okay, before you leave these two areas, one, needing to be witnessed from an outside source so that you can better see it for yourself. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. And part of that, and I understand that differently too with all the work I've done in the last few years, is it's the quality of attention that somebody places on you that allows you to feel really seen. Because so much of our lives, people are going, yeah, and they're not really, or they're listening to you and they're constructing a response, either a response that's like, oh, I totally understand what you're thinking about it. Let me tell you my story. Or let me refute what you're saying. Let me, rather than like really sitting there and listening and holding what you're saying.
Hmm. I actually, this is funny you're saying this because I just interviewed a therapist yesterday. She does this both sides of the couch where, yes, she's a therapist, but she gets therapy. Yes. And she was like, if anyone ever has any reason of why they're not going, let me give you one reason to go, is because who else sits and listens to you for a complete hour and actually pays attention and you can just like vent. And it's what you're saying too. It's there, isn't that crazy though? That's how soul filling that can be if somebody just listens. It makes me want to like make sure I'm really listening in a conversation.
And I think there's
Yeah.
another component to that too, which again, I'm realizing as I'm sort of diving into my flavor of neuro spicy, or as one of my friends recently said, like, welcome to the spice rack. You got to figure out where you are. And I was like,
Neuro spicy. This is
right?
amazing. Okay.
Um, is that when I say stuff out loud, it makes it, that's often when I have my understanding. It's the process of speaking it that I'm like, oh, that's how I feel about that. Which is fascinating because like that would seem illogical in some ways. Like, doesn't your brain form the thoughts before and then that's how they come out your mouth? But for me, and it also has really helped me understand some of my children with the flavors of neurospice that they have going on, is like, do you spend a lot of time in that internal rumination and then you come to that realization and then you share that with people? Or is it the process of speaking that allows you to go, oh, that's what I think. That's what I feel.
Yes. I'm being annoying because I keep giving examples because these literally all just popped up yesterday. But a client who was coming in going, oh, it's time to get back on track, hasn't been going well. And then as we communicate and as she hears herself through the whole session, she's like, oh, I guess I have been doing okay. Once she said it all out loud of what her week looked like, she was able to give herself credit for her efforts. But if we wouldn't have had the talk out loud conversation, she would have ended that holiday and week going, this is terrible. So thank you. I'm just giving real life. This is what we're talking about. Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay. And I love the neurospicy. I'm going to have to adopt that word because
Good, right?
that's fun. And yes, our kids all have their own neurospicies that we're trying really hard to learn. Oh, and then you had said something else in there and now it's gone. That's okay. We'll move on. But this has been, oh, I know, just using somatics as a word for the people who are not quite where you are. Go
So
into the definition of that.
So you probably most people have heard of like psychosomatic, like a psychosomatic disorder, effect, feeling, symptom, right? Psycho is
Hmm.
like that's the mind causing an effect on the body, the soma. So somatic work is working with the body rather than working with the mind, right? So
Okay.
it's prioritizing the information that the body is giving you. Like there's lots of different definitions, but that's the way that what the work that I do is really kind of focused on. So a lot of it is about non-linear movement. So it's moving your body either with an intention, like I'm going to release something. And in the process of just moving your body, you're like, oh, that's what, like, and something will pop into your mind. You'll go, I didn't know that was there. Or you're moving your body to find pleasure, like, oh, like, wow, moving my right shoulder feels really good. And then that might give you some insight into some things that you're not including in your life, or some things that you want more of, or some things that are, so you can go in with a particular lens, a question, so it's really about moving your body, and in that process of moving it, not in a like, I'm gonna lift my arms up and I'm gonna do any kind of rhythm. It's just literally like moving your body in a completely organic way, eyes closed, because we're such visual people, so that you're not going, oh gosh, I need to vacuum, or
Yes.
whatever it is that we find when we're on our hands and knees, and just allowing things to pop up. So there's a sort of a mindfulness aspect to it, as in the presence, because I distinguish between meditation and mindfulness. Mindfulness is doing things in a very present way. And that can be cooking, having sex, working out, reading a book, but it's just doing the thing and being completely present with the thing. Whereas meditation is just working with the mind. And so this process is like a mindfulness practice, because you're moving your body with an intention to understand.
So this is interesting to me because I feel like if somebody's been doing a lot of therapy, because that is working more with the mind and the mental space, the somatic piece would be a very good pairing with therapy, right?
So, and I think that we prioritize that, and I, come from that lens academically, and I come from that lens because my father is a psychoanalyst, a Jungian. So I grew up in a home where we really valued what was going on here, and our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings and our experiences. And that is huge and healing and powerful. But for me, I got to this point where I was like, I'm still stuck. And I've done all of the kind of the meditation and the journaling and the, all of the quote unquote self-care things that I teach and support people in, in the kind of life coaching aspect of the way I support people, and not so much in the business way, but they all tie together. I mean, we can go off on a tangent about that, but I realized that was doing all that, and I was having therapy. I was doing all the things that I was supposed to do, and I still was feeling stuck. And I was like, something else has got to give here. So I just started asking my friends, like, how did you deal with this problem that you've talked about? Or like, what are the modalities? People suggested all the kinds of things to me, from all of the plant medicine things to, acupuncture. I just got a whole list of things. And I kind of sat with all of these things and thought, what do I feel drawn to most? And then, because I'm, a PhD, I'm like, okay, and what does the data say about all of these things, right? Yes. And like the plant medicine thing seemed interesting to me. It seemed terrifying on many levels to me to put myself in that state. It felt very vulnerable and uncomfortable. So that I looked into the data of that, because I was curious about that. And what a lot of the data says about plant medicine healing is that, you need to have, I think the statistic, and I can't remember exactly, something like for every hour you are experiencing this, you need at least 20 hours of talk therapy to process the experience, to make it worthwhile. And that just having a plant experience doesn't create the long-term shift, because you don't know how to integrate it and make sense of it and weave it together with the trauma where you're moving to, right? So I was like, okay, that to me, and then also I was living in the Midwest, dealing with that, like it just felt really complicated. And COVID, like I was like, yeah, yep. So, so it was a matter of like me sort of digging into what people I know and love, because that's the way I always go with all of my coaches, with my healers, doctors. Like I always go like, who do you love and why, as a starting point, rather than Google,
Yes, that's such a good question. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna sound dumb here for a second. Go spell plant, like what are you saying there? I don't know this therapy.
Like psilocybin therapy, or why ayahuasca.
No, you're gonna have to describe it.
Okay, so psilocybin, it's a mushroom, and I don't know very much about it, but it's used in two different ways therapeutically, from what I can understand. One is low dose every day as a way of slightly affecting the way you show up, kind of like taking a psychiatric medication. And then you take a higher dose in a supported therapeutic environment. I don't really completely understand it all, but it detaches your mind and allows you to see things from a different viewpoint. And some people describe the same with ayahuasca. It gives you this sort of sense of stepping up and bigger. And like, I didn't dig into it, because I realized quickly that this was not going to be the initial starting approach of mine. But from what I understand is it creates different perspectives, different views, different lenses, different ways of integrating the experiences you've had, the people in your life, what they mean to you, and basically kind of how you're patterned, right? How you're showing up, like what led you to be who you are? What are you not seeing? So sort of, I think the way I would describe it is the sort of the 30,000 foot view, is that so many of us are so locked in with our habits, with our trauma, with the way we show up, that having this sort of expansive like freedom. But I mean, you need to talk to somebody who's done it and who's trained in it.
Yeah.
But that's my understanding of what it can do, is that it can give you a totally different way of thinking about what you've experienced. But then the issue is, how do you then integrate that into finding healing for your trauma, finding different
Right.
mindsets, different ways of thinking about what you value, and et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Okay. It's all coming clear now, and I'm trying to think of the most concise way to give this to our community because you're giving us such this great hope story and broad overview. Because what we're seeing out of this is there are so many different I'm going to call them tools for a second that we could be using and approaching. If one's not fully working, trying another, combining tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go into, and I was given permission, community, to ask this, but because you have gone through some trauma, big T, little t, both. And I would agree that everybody who's listening probably could raise their hand and say the same thing. And starting to realize how much that really is affecting their health journey. I think sometimes we can go through our younger years and be like, I've got this, I'm in control of this. And then all of a sudden, we're in these perimenopausal years and going, why I like my anxiety's through the roof. The things that I felt like I used to be able to handle, those traumas are now all of a sudden surfacing. So, kind of taking the tools that you're mentioning and your life experience, can you walk us through just that part of your journey? Because I think other people will relate on that.
Absolutely. So I got into training in and using Ayurveda, which is an Indian kind of health way of viewing the relationship between the mind and the body and your environment. It's literally called the science of life. That's what the word Ayurveda translates as. Because I had dysregulated sleep when one of my children had cancer, and I was getting hives, and I was putting on weight and losing weight, and the allopathic Western doctors were prescribing drugs for symptom suppression, like sleeping pills, but without giving me an underlying disorder. And that felt completely illogical to me. I was like, if you're suppressing a symptom, but you don't understand where it's coming from, what if there's something else going on that you don't see? Like that to me felt like a kind of slapping a band-aid on a problem. And that's what led me to Ayurveda, because I wanted to understand a different way of trying. I was like, I used to be able to sleep through the night. I used to be able to. So I started the practices. They worked. I got trained in it. I became a health coach in that space and worked with those for many years personally and professionally, and then sort of wove in all of my other, as I've spoken about, trainings, because I'm always like, hang on, this bit is missing. I need to figure out how to help people in this space, right? When I started to put on weight during COVID, so I'm 48. So COVID started when I was about 44, 43, just before I turned 44. And I found myself putting on weight, and I thought, okay, I'll do what I normally do, right? I will exercise more. I'll make sure I'm sleeping well. I'll make sure I'm not eating right before bed. I'll watch my sugars and carbs. None of that worked. I was like, oh, crap. So I initially got frustrated, and I was like, why is the thing that I do, and like lifting weights and like all of the things that I knew had worked in the past and that I like the data suggested was right. So then I ended up again talking to some of my friends and going, who have you used? What has worked? And I found a health coach who was also an RN. And she did a hormone panel, but the spit test over a month to look at my hormones. She did blood work, fecal work. She gathered all the data, which was important to me, Gesundheit, so that like we could look at the science. And then she then was like, how are you living? What are you doing? What are you eating? And she basically said to me, okay, your hormones are shifting. Your gut has some inflammation, but what you really need to do is you need to eat 3 times the amount of protein every day that you're eating. And I'd been much more on the kind of plant-based end of the spectrum for many years for a number of reasons, for the planet, for the environment. I felt better. I got much more fiber. Like my system just, I mean, I wasn't hardcore vegan, but I was sort of, one of those people that would eat a piece of fish every couple of weeks type vegan, vegetarian, whatever. The labels don't really make sense to me anymore. But she's like, you need to eat about 150 grams of protein a day. To put it in context, an egg is 6, so it's like when she said that to me, I was like, how am I going to do this? This is just crazy, right? But I'm all like, okay, this is what you're suggesting is going to work, so I'll try it. So I trained myself over a year to triple my protein, and I felt $1 million. The weight dropped off in a healthy pound, 2 pounds a week kind of way, not the like dropping 30 pounds, which is like a really crappy way to lose weight. I didn't have the peaks and troughs of energy of like that kind of 3 p.m. crash. I was like, oh, wow, this stuff works. This is really interesting. And it's also like so opposite from what I kind of felt like was the right thing for me. Like I've always been attracted to like black beans and kale. Like my body just craves sort of that hippie vegan food. Like I love it. All my life, I'm like, give me the hummus, give me the cat. Like I just, I love
Yeah.
all of that. Like, and I was like, this feels weird that I should be. And then I got to a point where I was craving the chicken and the salmon and the eggs and the cottage
Mm.
cheese and the Greek yogurt. But it totally, and I lost 40 pounds over a year and felt amazing. So part of it is, I think, that process of being willing to disrupt your framework. And one of the things that I see a lot with my coaching is that I help people create the daily habits that connect to their big, juicy life and business vision. And so large part of it is creating the automation, because we make 35,000 plus decisions every day. So if we can reduce those decisions by creating automation, yay, we free up mental space, time, energy. But when things become automatic, for many of us, particularly, I'm discovering in the neurospicy space, because it doesn't give us the dopamine anymore, right? We get bored and we're like, why do I get up and meditate? Like, that's just boring. Like, why don't I get up and watch like my favorite show? That's not going to set my day in the right, right? So you have to
Yes.
then be willing to create a new framework, a new structure to support your habit.
Mhm.
And going through that experience and a few others really helped me dig into that. And then I started HRT too, which again was a life changer, because again, I was having very disrupted sleep. Again, working really hard to create impeccable sleep hygiene, going to bed at
Yeah.
the same time every night, not eating 4 hours before I go to bed, not drinking, no blue light, all the stuff that we're told works was not working. And I was like, okay. Anxiety. I was like this, like I meditate every day, journal, I go to therapy, I do all these things.
Yeah.
What's going on? And then I ended up deciding, and I'd been somebody that had been really leery about relying on a prescription. And actually my practitioner, very pro woman. I don't need the scientific data, which I loved as a doctor. She's like, I need to listen to you because women are not listened to in healthcare.
Mhm.
You need to tell me how you feel, and I'm going to trust that what you say is true. And I was like, I like burst into tears. I was like, oh, thank you.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's what's really interesting about that HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is that it really is based off of the symptoms. It's not that they're taking lab work and going, well, your numbers are here, and so we're going to give you this and this. It's like, you're still not sleeping. Well, then let's investigate this. Or you're super irritable. Let's investigate this. And again, I think that's like, it's overwhelming for people to hear about hormone replacement therapy, because it depending on where you live, depending on your doctors, like how open people are to it or not. But we're getting there. Like, I just feel like if our listeners hear nothing else, just let down your defenses for a second and just know that there are other things that we need to be asking or talking about in our visits. And I love that you mentioned your weight loss with doing it differently. Like, we are so prone to going back and just banging down that same door because it's worked in the past. And most people keep wanting to go at something harder and stronger. And instead, we just maybe need to do it differently. And you just have like a beautiful story around that. You said it was kind of hard to like cave into something. You had to put a lot of trust in somebody else's advice. How
Yeah.
long did it take you to get fully on board that, like, okay,
Well, I mean,
this is my path?
part of it is always that thing. This country is so carb focused, so carb. I mean, there are lots of other countries that are very carb focused too, but like the qualitatively different carbs I find when I eat bread in France and Italy, I don't feel the lethargy and the bloating that I do when I eat a lot of carbs in the US, sort of the kind of processed white carbs I'm talking about, the sort of highly processed. So I mean, the big thing was just it required that okay, I need to just think completely different about how I shop in the grocery store and what I do when I go out to eat. And so it's a little bit like, and I do this work with my clients, like if you don't give yourself the space to do some kind of work around the obstacles, you'll never make it successful, right? So, so if I've got a client that is trying to institute a new practice and they don't sit there and think, what are the things that might get in the way of me doing this, right? Like, am I leaving enough time? Am I putting it on my calendar? Am I telling the people around me who need to know that I'm making this change in my life? Like, am I telling I've got this with a small business owner I'm working with who's hired an operations manager. And that means that he doesn't need to get to his desk at 7:30 in the morning because he's got somebody who can manage his team, right? But that
Yes.
required conversations with other people who at first were like, but you're the CEO, you're the owner, you're the founder. Like, what are you doing? Like, you should be in the office, modeling that. And he was like, well, no, I've spent 16 years building this and I've got young kids and I want to spend time with them. And so he didn't do
Yes.
that. And people were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, we need to have these conversations, right? Otherwise, this is not going to work. And that was a big thing for me. I was like, okay, I need to look at the obstacles. Okay, so these are the restaurants I generally go to. What can I order on the menu so that when I'm sitting there, I'm not going, I can go, okay, I want this, and can I get it replaced with this and a side of that so that it fits more in that model? Or when I go to the grocery store, so I got in the habit of bulk cooking. It just required that, like, how can I do some of that obstacle work before so that I'm successful?
And it didn't change overnight, right? This was a process.
Yeah,
Hmm.
totally. And it took me a good year to lose the weight, and
Hmm.
and in the last year I've been playing with weaning off that amount of protein because it's hard to source good protein everywhere you go, and I'm not a huge fan of eating really antibiotic, human growth hormone flooded, full of ethically suspicious animal protein. Like, that felt still really crappy to me. So sourcing that is hard. And I do think that long term, I don't want to be somebody that consumes that amount of protein. But I recognize that maybe for the next 5 to 10 years, that's what my body's going to need, right? So I've been playing in the last sort of 6 months with what does it look like when I replace one of my meals with tofu and black beans and other forms of sort of cleaner protein that are easier to get, sort of higher quality if you're at a diner or a cafe or a bar.
Right, right. No, that's such a good point. I'm curious too. Have you noticed though, with the higher protein like labs, did those still remain well or even get better?
I had
Yeah.
a reduction in inflammation in my gut, which was interesting. I mean, and I suspect, I mean, it's hard to disentangle whether that was a reduction in the processed carbs, which, as a parent, like, you're going out and you're eating bagels and you're going for pancakes. I'm not a microwave dinner person, but just like you go out and you eat and you have a bit of bread in the Italian restaurant, like that, those sorts of, because I cut out all of those. So I'm not sure if it's the cutting out of those or the increase of the protein. Like,
Hmm.
yeah.
It's always both. And I think when one thing goes well, I like the idea of the focus being more on adding protein and then some of the other stuff accidentally coming out. That sits better with my soul, if
That
I were to go
totally.
attack that. Yeah. Not deprivational.
Mm.
So, well, congrats. That's a really cool journey. Women in the 40 plus, we can still lose weight. It just is going to look different than it used to. So hang in there and keep asking the questions, keep researching. I also want to point out because some of the stuff that you talk about, if somebody else is not educated in that area, they might feel like it's very woo-woo. And
Mm.
I love that you have this PhD and you come from like a very highly educated family. Like there is nothing about what you've studied or done that is fluff. Like
Mm.
it is, you go to the research was straight out of your mouth. I always go to the research.
Mhm.
And so do you feel like I don't know, maybe you're surrounded by different individuals, but that you have to kind of prove some of that sometimes, or like, this is why
Mm.
you should be investigating other tools or ideas?
I think it really depends on the person. One of the healers I worked with over the last few years was, again, a reference. And he was a sort of shamanic energy healer. And, I would go and see him, and whatever he would do with moving energy in my nervous system was really extreme, as in I would spot between my periods because he'd broken chains with like past lives sexual violence, like stuff that I was like, do it. Like, he's like, don't try and logic your way through this, Tamsin, just let it do its thing. Or like I would start hyperventilating and my head would fly back. I would feel like I had 200 pounds of weight on me, like stuff that sort of logic brain was like what's happening here, this
Uh-huh.
makes me. But I would feel so much better after he had shifted stuff within me. And so I play the dance of really listening to my intuition. Does this person feel sincere? The way I talk about it sometimes with my clients is the data suggests, and this I think is quite compelling, that when we communicate with somebody, 7% of the message is words, 38% is tone, and the 55% remaining is body language. So, right, so the more you do this somatic work, the more you do therapy, the more you start listening to yourself, you start to notice other people. Part of it is like, sometimes I'll have a conversation with somebody and I'll be like, do your thing with me. Like, I know you're going to help me. And I don't
Yeah.
need to do the data and research them and look up their credentials, because I just feel such a deep alignment in who they are and how they show up
Yeah.
that I can just immediately go for them. Right. Same with, when you meet somebody and you're like, oof, no, 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 no. Right. Like, and there's that kind of, they'll be like, it's so nice to meet you. They've got that closed in body and that squinty face, and you're just like those words and that body and that like there's like, whoa, there's something going on here and I don't trust it. Sometimes I just follow it without doing the data. And other
Mhm.
times, like with this woman with the weight loss stuff, I was curious about my data because I hadn't had that done. I hadn't had my hormones tested before. I hadn't had my gut tested before, so I was just curious, like, what is the baseline? I'm in my 40s, like, what's going on here? Personally, I do it on a case-by-case basis, but I think what I'm really trying to say is that I see value in both ways of approaching your healing, and that you also have to kind of take the lens of like, well, what's worked in the past for me? Because sometimes I've gone to the best doctors for the things, and the doctors have treated me in a way where I felt so completely dehumanized that I thought, looking them up on all these rating sites where their credentials are great and their solving is great, but when I go into the appointment, they don't make eye contact and they explain over me as if I don't have a brain, and they patronize me, etc., right? Or don't give me any authority over my body or the way I'm feeling. Doesn't matter how many degrees you've got, how smart you are, how well reviewed you are. If I
Yeah.
feel that when I'm with you, that's not going to help me heal.
Right. Right. Yes, you have to feel very well supported. And because everybody's being so vulnerable in their
Mm,
journeys too, and again, I think vulnerable younger and now even more so in this season of life where it's like our bodies are shifting and changing and we're not always ready to talk about it, but we need to.
yeah.
So I would be curious, like, who's your favorite client if somebody is seeking you out, going, I love what you're talking about. Like, what do you like to offer? Who do you seek out that you feel like you mesh with, kind of, and where to find you, where are your best places to follow you?
Sure, sure. So best places to follow me. I like long form communication. And when I say long form, I mean like a 1,000 word article that takes you 5 minutes to read, which historically that might not be long form. But you
Yeah,
can find me,
true.
right? You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm building a Substack too on that note. And then I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. But the places that I really hang out the most is LinkedIn, where I can sort of produce longer form, more thoughtful pieces, and Substack. The people that I love working with are people who never stop learning. They're always curious to reframe and rethink a little bit, like, okay, like process is not working. I'm doing really well, but I want to go from here to there. And that's going to require a totally different way of thinking about it. So I love working with people who are committed to their personal growth and committed to being open and learning. And I guess a big feature of that is they're comfortable with duality and paradox, that there
Mhm.
isn't just one way to view it. So I was having a conversation with a girlfriend the other day about how you approach addiction, and that there are, people fall into very extreme camps, right? You've either got to do the 100% abstinence or you can do a harm reduction. And the harm reduction model says, let's look at maybe taking the drugs in a safe space, maybe reducing the amounts, maybe looking at the communities you're hanging out with, and that you can get to abstinence that way, but that maybe starting with abstinence is not the right way. So I like to work with people who are willing to play in duality and paradox in that gray space and be like, oh, this bit of this theory, this bit of this, so that it's not just this is the way that it works for everybody. And the way that I like to support people, there are three big ways. One is one-on-one coaching. And I love the intimacy and depth and creation that occurs when you work intimately one-on-one with somebody. The second is facilitated group work. So going into organizations, working with teams, working with groups of people who are really mission driven. And this kind of is a thing that's across all of the work I do. I really love working with people who are deeply passionate about what they're doing in the world, and that they're really driven to change the way and it could be like creating safe spaces for queer people. It could be how we take care of the environment. It could be about, separating state from church. It's not so much what it is, it's that you are deeply committed and connected and passionate to who you are and what you do in the world. I like working with people like that who are really in it because they want to make a difference, right? So they want to ripple their positive change into the world. And the third way I work with people, so the facilitator is also a speaker, like I get on stages and do that. The third way is I'm building a community around this theme, particularly for people who are in senior levels, who are often the people who hold space for others. And so I'm creating a container that's launching in 2025, and it's going to be Alchemy with Tamsin. And it's about creating a space where strong, powerful CEOs, entrepreneurs, high-level execs, who are the ones who are always in charge, always in that kind of, I'm in the control situation, I'm leading, can come in and go, okay, I've got this problem, I'm stuck, I need a place to play it out, I'm trying to deal with this team issue, I'm trying to deal with this navigate. And on that note, two of the trainings that I'm embarking on to really ramp up my ability to hold that space, because it's really important for me. One is I'm doing a deep year-long training in equity-centered coaching, because it's really important to me that I can create a container that's safe for anybody who wants to enter it and who makes sense to enter it for me. So I want to create a space where all people who want to be in it and who I think would mesh well with that community can come in, and that I can contain it and make them feel safe and heard and their voices are valued. The second training that I'm doing is I've spent a couple of years in communities learning skills around facilitation, which is really about how you choreograph groups of people to change and work on problems. And because as I started this conversation with, the way that I learn is that I need to be in a community where I have to do assignments and I have to write and I have to talk and I have to think and I have to listen. So I'm doing a training in that next year too, so that I can really continue to hone my skills, so that again, I can create this container for people. So those are the places that I'm really playing. And then I'm launching a podcast, because I've been interviewed on so many podcasts over the years. I'm like, why am I doing this myself? Because I just love talking to people.
You'd be so good at it. You are so good at it. I mean, you can publicly go speak on stage. The podcast thing is right up your alley. Oh, I can't wait for that to launch. You will have to let me know when it does. Congrats on everything. And I love what you offer. And if you could wrap your arms around our community and just give them one more nugget of like, if you heard nothing else today, how would you like to send them off?
I would say pause, notice, and make a decision that is aligned with who you are, how you want to show up, and what you value, rather than what you've been trained to show up and value and respect, or that you have learned through trauma or colonial patriarchal fill in the blank framework that maybe is no longer serving you.
So good. Thank you so much for joining us and all your wisdom today, Tamsin. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.